Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. My name is Marty Bennett, President and Founder of SMIE Consulting, here today to cover three important stories that have crossed the wires in the last week of international education topics. And we're going to cover those today in a few minutes. But first, before we do, I want to say to my U.S. colleagues who are catching this either live on the podcast or on YouTube, thanks for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. We hope that you get some time off in the next few days to relax and recharge after a long season of travel. And we hope that the new year to come is productive for you and leads to hopefully a brighter future for you and your students on your campuses. So thanks again for joining me. For those who are new to SMIE Consulting, it stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting, and was founded 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago now, to assist institutions, organizations that are looking to better connect with international students, and also organizations looking to better connect with U.S. higher education in the business of recruiting international students. So we founded the company to help, in that regard, institutions and organizations that were of that mindset to become more international, to connect students and universities with prospective educational opportunity. So what we do is each Wednesday at this time on our Facebook page for SMIE Consulting, we share this time to go over three stories of relevance to the international education community, and then share thoughts on how these stories, the perspectives on these stories, can be implemented or adjust future international enrollment plans or international education goals that you might have for your organization or your company. So what I'd like to do today is we'll start with obviously last week being International Education Week. The news wires were flooded with a number of stories from the Open Doors reports and the subsequent data that came out about the drop for the second year in a row in new international student enrollments in the fall of 2017. And then the survey results from that IIE and another group of associations conducted this fall that show that trend is indeed continuing in the fall of 2018 with universities and colleges in the United States. So the focus this week will not be so much on those numbers. We did a little bit of that last week during last Wednesday's Midweek Roundup. What I'd like to do today is focus on kind of stepping back from those numbers that we saw last week and go over three stories that really paint a picture of what's to come and where U.S. institutions, where the United States as a whole can and should be moving in a direction to make the United States an overall better destination for international students than perhaps it currently is. And I'd like to start with an article, and as for those who are new, I post the links to these articles on the Facebook page for SMIE Consulting, where you can read on as we go through, or for future reference if you're catching it on the podcast. You can also subscribe to our SMIE Consulting, all the SMIE news that's fit to share. That is also archived on our website. I'll provide the links to those for you. You can subscribe to that letter to get these stories and more every Monday direct to your inbox. But this first story is from the current president of George Mason University, Angel Cabrera. He is a former Fulbright student, Fulbright scholarship recipient from Spain, who came to the United States on a Fulbright award and later returned to lead a major research university, George Mason University, just outside D.C. And he paints and presents a very unique perspective, one that in international education circles is certainly not a unique one, but certainly is a story, a sobering story of where the United States is missing the boat on a lot of points of interest related to the atmosphere in the United States currently regarding international education. He obviously references the Open Doors release, and he talks about the causes of the declines are are multifaceted and doesn't lay the blame completely on the Trump administration's policies, but does say that the administration's tough talk on immigration walls and travel bans is not helping. Very clear, and that is true. While he makes the point, and quoting here, while other countries work hard to attract international students, we are managing to send a message that talented foreigners are not welcome here, just when we need them most. He also talks about how Canada has seen as reaping the benefits of of our kind of unwelcoming attitude in a lot of circles, the way it's viewed. And he says Canada is eating our lunch for our neighbors to the north because of our doubling down on anti-immigration rhetoric. So what I think is important, and he makes the point clearly in his article, a lot of what underlies a lot of the anti-immigrant rhetoric doesn't necessarily, but logically doesn't always, should not extend to what international students bring to the United States, because or the immigrants themselves that come to these shores. I'm one. I came to the United States as an L2 intercompany transfer dependent when my father brought our family to the United States from the UK in 1974. I was fortunate enough to become a naturalized citizen after his work visas completed their terms, and he became a naturalized U.S. citizen, and then I did shortly after. But what he makes the point in, Dr. Cabrera, in his article, opinion piece in the Washington Post, that international students do not take away resources from American students, and in fact they give so much more to our university campuses in the way of economic value, jobs that are created to support those students, contributions to the talent pool in critical disciplines, a number of those critical disciplines in STEM fields in particular. For many U.S. colleges and universities, particular major research universities, if they did not have those international STEM students, they would not be able to operate. Those are the lifeblood of a lot of those graduate departments. So for universities to say, for folks to say that these students do not bring value to the United States or take resources from American students, it's clearly a scare tactic and demonstrably wrong. With the economic value, just on the economic value alone that these students bring to the United States and to the areas and communities where they live. So I think Dr. Cabrera's call to action is one that means that our institutions should not be the only ones saying these things about international students, about the value that they bring to the United States. And I think what is important from his article is the perspective of a former international student. He makes the point that many international students have gone on to lead or found major companies in the United States. He's talked extensively about Uber and SpaceX, that you have two of America's most iconic software companies, Microsoft and Google, now being led by Indians who came to the United States as graduate students. So there's so much that these students bring, and he makes the point clearly that it's not just a university or a higher education community that needs to be shouting from the rooftops on this. It needs to be the public discourse needs to change to reflect the value of these students, of these institutions that enroll these students, to the greater good of the United States. And so I think that it's a very timely article, obviously, with International Education Week last week, but it's also one that represents, I think, what everyone in international education is saying about, particularly in the United States, about what institutions can and should be doing, the kind of stories they should be telling, not only to future students that might be looking to come, but also to their legislators and to their government officials, that these students have incredible value, and it's up to us to make that case, because they're not going to be able to make the case for themselves. We are their voice, and we need to take responsibility for that in a lot of respects. So the more advocacy we do, the more blogging we do, the more engaging we do with our elected officials, with our future students, and showing the real face of what these students are and to this country, not the threat that so many people think they are. And I think that's something that we need to definitely pay attention to as we continue in our work in international education. A related note to that is another story this past week from the Chronicle of Higher Ed, that detailed how colleges can help international students in finding work after graduation. And this article is obviously timely with regard to obviously Open Doors numbers, which highlight that though there are new international student declines the last couple of years, the overall number of international students in the United States is up year on year over the previous year, 1.5%, so not a huge number at all. But that growth is being driven almost exclusively by our increase in the number of students who are on OPT, optional practical training. And that optional practical training time, another reason for the increase is the larger number of students who are pursuing STEM degrees in the United States that have now, for each degree level, bachelor's, master's, doctoral, that they complete in the United States, have up to 3 years of work experience after they're done with their degrees for each degree level. So there are up to now, and then the numbers from Open Doors this past week related that half of all international students now in the United States are STEM students. So that number means that half of the students that are staying on after they graduate to have work experience are looking in the STEM fields. And that's going to be driving a lot of future students as well, as long as the current laws that allow the OPT extension for an additional 2 years beyond the one that all international students get in F1 student status per degree level. So that's something that this article certainly paints the picture for universities, that what ways that they can be common issues that they're facing in career services and international student advising offices, student services offices related to student internships and employment after graduation. And it presents some tips and some common issues that institutions seem to have had that do enroll a large number of international students. So we see students located in larger metropolitan areas seem to have a little bit more, a little easier time perhaps finding internships and potential jobs after graduation. But that's not certainly a rule across the country. And so it takes a look at students at the University of Washington at Seattle, and talking to some international students who are unsure whether they're going to stay in the United States after graduation. One student who secured an internship, which many students see as a potential path to a job after graduation, she will see a lot of employers now, it seems, there's been recent studies or surveys of employers that would hire MBA graduates typically, that only half would be willing to hire an international student graduating with an MBA currently. But that's just the business-related fields. But you see the concern amongst employers is not just related to OPT time, but to potential sponsoring of students after their OPT expires for a more permanent position with that company and in the H-1B status. So where the company has to pay the fees for that student in some way. So that is really a challenge here for institutions that current international students who have come to the United States previously are anxious about what's next. We've seen that for OPT numbers, the lion's share of OPT students, 70% or so or more, 75% or more, are actually Indian, because that is a high priority for Indian students that are coming to the United States. If they're not in the STEM fields or business fields, that accounts for about 90% of Indian students in the United States in STEM or business fields, that the lion's share of those students are coming because they want potential opportunities to work after graduation. So they right now make up the lion's share of the OPT students, and the decline in Indian graduate students applying are in the United States this past year is particularly troublesome because they are driving the OPT growth. So if those numbers continue, OPT or incoming Indian graduate students continue, unless they're replaced by students from other countries in large numbers, those OPT numbers will eventually drop. And when that happens, there will be significant damage done into those overall numbers of international students in the United States, as well as the economic impact of fewer students that will have on the communities where they live. So you look at the OPT numbers, and this article also goes to the next level with regard to H-1B, and of those numbers there, 65,000 applications, or awarding of 65,000 H-1B visas is done every April. That cap of 65,000 applies to non-educational institutions, organizations, and that cap was reached in 5 days this past year. And for this next year, for 2019, there's already over 94,000 applications for those 65,000 spots, with still 4 months, almost over 4 months before that deadline. So challenges are for international students is whether they're even going to be eligible for these jobs in the future, and whether employers are going to be willing to hire them because of when they're looking long term about employability. You do hear some concerns from the career services and international or career development counselors at institutions, and they do see some challenges, obviously, in terms of what they can and can't say, and what's the law is now, what it's going to be. They can't predict that necessarily, but they do see that there are challenges for international students in terms of their preparedness and in terms of their networking skills, and that's something that institutions now are focusing on earlier on in the process, before that junior and senior year, before that final year when they're applying for jobs and internships. That's working on networking skills of students in the career services in conjunction with the international student offices. These are some things that I think there are the cultural differences that international students face. In some ways, can be a real downside to their potential progress towards internships and jobs, depending on how well they integrate in the campus community can be a challenge as well. But to be able to talk, to brag about yourself necessarily in the job interview process and on your resumes and your cover letters, CVs, whatever it may be, there's always some challenges there. So with regard to these career services offices, that if they're taking it, if they have an effective partnership with the international student offices related to international students' job search, career searches, then those are probably the best models. There's certainly a piece that they talk with the students, or talk with the folks at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, flagship university in Illinois, about they're taking 9-week courses on communication skills and training international students in writing cover letters, doing interviews, and developing LinkedIn profiles. These are things that they do for their U.S. students as well, but they have the way you approach an international student and the issues that they need to be aware of and be familiar with, and their tactics that they need to take as they develop their skills is going to be different than what your typical American student would need to know or be used to. So I think it's important that universities that are looking to be honest with their international students about prospects for employment also don't just let it sit there, that they also are doing proactive things to address common challenges that international students have down the road. And that's why international student enrollment management strategies, if they're only founded on recruiting and bringing them in, and don't bother taking care of students and meeting needs of students throughout their stay, not just in the orientation program or getting them health insurance initially, but at the back end when students can feel very let down if they're not able to find jobs or internships or after graduation and have to return home with nothing other than their degree, which obviously is value, but not as potentially as great a value as it could have been. So the more universities do to be be proactive on the post-study work opportunities and preparing students for those opportunities, developing their soft skills, that students will need to be successful in the job search and the networking that they need to do to find the right jobs, to find the right networks to be a part of. That's what's really going to have students leave their institutions with a better taste in their mouth than having no luck in the job search and then having to go home. So that's just things to think about as you, for not just the recruiters that I know well, but the international student advising offices. You have a responsibility too to be broadening your network on your own campuses to work with career services or professional development offices, whatever they may be called on your campus, because it takes a campus to graduate an international student and an effective graduate international student. So always be looking on the lookout for ways that you can extend what you're doing beyond your office to other offices on campus. And when it comes to the post-study work opportunities, that's a critical piece that we hope that you take a look at. Now, one last article I'd share with you now from Inside Higher Ed. A very useful internet opinion piece from someone who talks about it through the lens of his own family's example, where the author James Applegate argues that why internationalization matters, and in the global war for talent, as he calls it in his opinion piece for Inside Higher Ed. And I think what is critical here is what we're calling, what he calls in his article, internationalization of campuses is no longer just a nice thing to do, it's absolutely necessary. And hence my headline here, Internationalize or Die. And I say that with all seriousness, frankly, in this day and age we live in, the political environment we live in, that institutions that do not internationalize, that aren't, and when I say internationalize, that's a very broad and deep and wide subject. If you've spent any time in the international ed industry, you realize that it's not just about bringing international students in. It's not just about sending U.S. students to study abroad. It's not about just faculty coming in from overseas. It's not about just your curriculum. And partnerships you might be developing. It is everything related to how your institution views itself in the wider world. I've been on university campuses, frankly, where their outlook was, though they say they're international, they are very parochial, and they don't look beyond their own communities of borders for their impact on the world and what they can and should be doing in the world. Institutions can be very insular and islands unto themselves. We've heard those stereotypes for years in the higher ed business, but internationally speaking, that tends to be more true than not. Where institutions, depending on the students that attend their institutions, the makeup of their board of directors, their focus and mission as institutions, they might want the international students on their campus because they bring dollars to the institution, help drive some of the growth in certain new areas that they're looking to do for the local communities, but they don't really commit what needs to be committed to really embrace everything that international students can bring to a campus, what study abroad really means and what the investment in study abroad really needs in order to thrive, particularly for U.S. students that are in areas of the country that it's very rare for them to have passports ever in their lives. They maybe have never traveled outside their own states and have a very limited perspective, and to start getting those students to think more broadly requires huge commitment by the institution. Some institutions clearly do not want to take that step, and that's fine. But if you're going to have be considered an international university, and to be a truly internationalized school or body of higher education, it has to be multifaceted on a number of different levels. And this is what the article does go into, and the author James Applegate compares what his son does with playing video games online, talking to players, his high school student, talking to players from around the world that he's gaming with, and that was quite a while ago. That was 10 years ago, according to the author. And what globalization has done, particularly in higher education, has made geography, as the author points out, less and less relevant to the formation of friends, support networks, business operations, and career development. And as he says there, that developing those skills that are necessary for 21st century colleges to provide students with the knowledge and skills for them to live and work in a truly global society. That means campuses must be internationalized. And they have to ask themselves the question, colleges do, are they preparing graduates for a global economy when those students have rarely or ever met, much less worked with, students from other cultures and countries on class projects and teams, that type of thing. So it's a very informative piece that really highlights a lot of the issues, whether it's Muslim bans, America First attitudes, what that means, and the ways of anti-immigration action that have existed in the United States, frankly, for over a century in different waves. They come and go. That xenophobic policy reaction to outsiders, to foreigners, is there's huge historical perspective on this. That's happened time and time again, and this is a wave that we're going through of where this is happening. But what internationalization of college campuses is something that, for the benefit of the students that universities portend to be educating, it's essential that they be prepared for a global economy and the world outside their own. And institutions that do not take the necessary steps to bring in the students from overseas, if they're not sending a lot abroad, bringing in students, bringing in faculty, having international courses that are required for students in their curriculums, in their common curriculum, in their general ed classes. This is absolutely key. And the realities of the new job markets out there, there's something in here, one of the quotes here is that more than 2/3 of all new and replacement jobs in the future will require a college credential. We know that. And that's with advancements in technology, artificial intelligence, automation, that leave students that don't have the various skills necessary to be mobile and nimble in their thinking and to adapt to new circumstances, to have skills that allow them to take on a variety of different potential jobs, is something that really is important, I think, for higher education as a whole to come to grips with. And it concludes with a couple important steps for colleges to go to raising the bar on internationalization, as he called it. He talks about recruiting more diverse set of students, not just from China, expanding opportunities for domestic students and faculty, a very important piece of that puzzle, to live and study abroad. It talks about campus life options, curriculum, classes, and student support services that embrace this kind of globalization, this global culture, globally competent graduates. And there's some great pieces in here, and I think it's definitely an uphill battle right now in today's political climate, but one that, if our industry is to survive, is going to be an important step that we all need to take as educators. So thanks. I do want to say that we covered some pretty meaty topics today, and ones that really, I think, go to the heart of who we are as international educators. And I encourage all of you, if you aren't already a part of NAFSA or not already in contact with your local Congress people and elected officials, to make regular efforts to reach out to them and express what you do, who you are, and how important what international education is in your world, in your work, but also to the future of the United States. And I think there's a lot of great resources that NAFSA provides and other organizations that are involved in fighting the good fight for international education. And really encourage you to stay abreast of what's happening. We can't be sticking our heads in the sands these days when it comes to the topics that are attacking our industry and the issues that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So encourage all of you to become as active as you can with your elected officials and see where this what you can do to help again fight that good fight. I'm going to leave you with a couple of resources. If you haven't already found our SMIE Consulting website, there's some great places where you can subscribe to the newsletter. Just posted the link to that on our Facebook page. That link I've shared is where you can also get connected with the podcast of this if you do not wish to see the video links of me every week, which you can also get on YouTube if you don't go to the Facebook archive on our video archive on our Facebook page. You can also get the podcast on your favorite podcast stream, whether iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and Podbean. All are available to you, so you're welcome to subscribe to those as you have opportunities. So the newsletter, again, as we've shared, is a way to get all of these stories more in depth. I'm posting the link to that as well on the Facebook page. Please subscribe to that, and you'll be able to get the about 10 to 15 stories each week into your inbox that highlight not only the stories themselves, but also why they're important and what institutions might be able to do with that in short. And we discuss them more in depth, some of them in depth here on the Midweek Roundup. So thanks again for joining us. Have a very happy Thanksgiving to my U.S. colleagues and look forward to connecting with you all next week. Cheers.